Welcome to Linguistically Aware, the podcast about all things linguistics. You are listening to CJSW 90.9 FM, broadcasting out of Calgary, Alberta, at the University of Calgary campus radio station, located on Treaty 7 land. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. My name is Brooklyn Shepard, and I'm a PhD student in linguistics at the University of Calgary. In this conversation-based podcast, I sit down with linguists, or language experts, to talk about the ways language and linguistics interacts with our daily lives. In this episode, I'm joined by Jesse Weir, a current PhD student in linguistics here at U of St. Jesse talks about their recent research in syntax, where they looked at how gender bias and gender stereotypes affect how quickly people might be able to understand and process certain kinds of sentences, depending on whether the sentence contained gender stereotypes or not. We talked a bit about what syntax is more generally, and talk about how perplexing these findings actually are. So let's take a listen to what Jesse had to share. Hi, Jesse. Thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm wondering if you could just start out by introducing yourself for our audience, a bit about your background and what you do at the University of Calgary.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Jesse. I'm a PhD student here at the University of Calgary, and I also did my undergrad here at the University of Calgary, graduating in 2020. And then I went off and did my master's degree at Simon Fraser University in linguistics before coming back here again in 2022 and starting my PhD with Dr. Dennis Storoshenko as my supervisor.
Cool, wicked. Yeah, I know we were here at undergrad together, right?
Yeah.
So I know that your research is primarily in the field of syntax, right?
Yeah, and more specifically, like experimental syntax. So like bringing people into the lab and having them read a whole bunch of sentences and evaluating how fast they're reading them or the judgments that they give on various sentences we present them with.
Okay, cool. That's really interesting. I'm wondering if you could just give us like a quick breakdown of what syntax is, like what kinds of questions you guys ask. And I know you specified experimental syntax. I'm assuming that's in contrast to theoretical syntax. Mm-hmm. Do you mind just discussing just syntax in general, just a little bit, just kind of, what it is, what kinds of questions you ask, what you're interested in, at a deeper level in your research?
Yeah. So syntax is basically how we conceive sentences being formed in the brain when they're being both produced and being like read or listened to. So, specifically, like from a base starting point, it would be like you picture a sentence being formed starting with the main verb of the sentence, and that verb would like select its kind of like related counterparts. Like if you have a verb like take a sentence like Brooklyn kicked the can or something, you would have Brooklyn, the one who is doing the kicking, and the can, the thing that is being kicked, both being associated with that verb, and just everything kind of being constructed and built up around that.
I was really afraid you were going to say Brooklyn kicked the bucket.
We're not going that idiomatic, no.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you. I think that was a really good description, especially with the where it all centers around the verb, because that is really true in a lot of syntax. Mm-hmm. So the reason I really brought you in here today is because I know you just recently presented your research that was titled "Trial Item Content Impacts Island Effects in Online Processing of English." Mm-hmm. Bit of a mouthful.
Yeah, it's a lot of big words in there.
At the Canadian Linguistics Association's annual conference, also known as the CLA. So before diving into the details of your research, I'm just wondering if you could explain to our listeners what you mean by island effects, and then also after that, what you mean by online processing. So if you want to start with whichever one you want.
Yeah, sure. So if we're going to talk about island effects, we the best way to do that would be to start about how a question is formed in English, like a typical like WH question. So if you have a question like, who does Brooklyn like? The answer to that, if you were to say it out in full, might be something like, Brooklyn likes Jesse, hopefully. So again, like there's this true. Association with the verb where in the answer, Brooklyn likes Jesse, like Jesse being located at the end of the sentence, associated closely with likes. But in the question, the WH word who is is out front of the sentence. So when we're trying to figure out how things are being constructed in the brain, what we conceive is happening is the WH word starts at the base position where Jesse would be in the answer, and then it moves out to the front of the sentence. So like we call that like a WH move operation. And where that becomes tricky is with island violations. And that's basically, you can think of it as like an illegal move, like in chess or something. Like you can only move like certain pieces certain ways. You can only move WH words in certain environments. So a good example of where an island violation would occur would be like, what does Jesse wonder where Brooklyn went to buy? That's a pretty terrible sentence, right?
I have no idea what it means.
Yeah, exactly, because it's like word salad. So that WH word what is moving from the end of the sentence again, like after by. But there's something called like a weak WH crossover effect in English, because when we're trying to move a WH word, we want to select the like closest one to the left edge of the sentence. So if we're selecting the one at the end of the sentence, but there's another WH word in there, where, it seems weird to select the what that's at the end of the sentence when the where is closer and more available.
Oh, yes, that makes sense. Wait, can you say your example sentence one more time?
Sure. What does Jesse wonder where Brooklyn went to buy?
Okay, I see. So it's because the what is starting, according to this thing where we think the WH words start out where the answer would typically be, right? Mm-hmm. But it's further down the sentence than the where.
Yeah.
So we would think, so in syntax, you would think that the where is supposed to move up, like the where is the one that moves.
Yeah, exactly.
But, so that's, okay, so that's, and that is true. That's something that is not allowed in English.
Yeah.
Is to move that further one to the front. To make a question. Okay, exactly. Interesting.
And that's a tricky one to get, like especially just hearing it. But I use that one because that's the example, like close to the ones we're using in this paper that we presented. But like an easier one would be if you have like a conjunction phrase. So like Brooklyn likes pork and beans. Mm-hmm. If you were to try to form a WH question with just one of those words out of the conjunct, so something like, what does Brooklyn like pork and? That's really weird.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So you would want to like contain both of those within a single WH word and move the whole thing, as opposed to like separating a conjunct. So like that one's called a conjunct island. It's a little bit easier to grasp when you're just hearing it. But yeah, islands are just these conditions where like WH moves are not permitted, and it just kind of gives you an unsettling feeling in your belly.
Yes. Yeah, I do feel unsettled.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah. So those are the island effects that you're talking about in this study. So you guys, like, were you looking at specific island effects? I know you said that WH, the first one that you gave, was sort of similar to what you were looking at. Mm-hmm. Were those the kinds of ones you were looking at, where you had the like two WH words and one was further down the sentence?
Yeah, those were the ones that we were looking at because they are like, they are described in the literature as like marginal islands. So they are ungrammatical, but if you like read them fast enough or you just hear it in passing, you might not be as bothered by it. Whereas like something like a conjunct island, that's a strong island, and you are likely to notice that and be more unsettled by it. So we were looking for something that is still technically wrong, but might be like rated slightly more grammatical than something that's like blatantly wrong.
Okay, interesting. Okay, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So then the other part of my question was about online processing. So you're specifically looking at this in online processing. And could you just briefly explain what you mean by online processing?
Yeah, so when doing experimental syntax work, there are two types of processing we typically look at: online processing and offline processing. Offline processing would be something like just getting somebody's gut feeling or rating on a sentence, where we're not measuring like any sort of like reaction time data or anything. We just want to know, like, rate this sentence on a scale of 1 to 7. How do you feel about it? And then we like take those ratings from multiple people and get kind of a baseline feeling of how a sentence like that would be accepted just in passing. Whereas online processing, we're looking more into like the finer details of how people are reading it. So we're like looking specifically at, like, we will use things like self-paced reading experiments like we used in this study, where we're presenting sentences in chunks or like word by word even, and measuring how fast people are reading each of those words or chunks, and then using that as a measure of like what is going on in their brain, like a proxy measure, sort of. Like the theory being that if you come across something that's weird in the sentence and you pause on it for a little bit, takes you a little bit longer to read it, like that's a sign that maybe there's something extra that you're having to process or kind of disambiguate as you're reading it. Okay,
yeah, that's really interesting. So you're really looking at how they're sort of understanding these things as they go through the experiment and as they go through the sentence itself.
Exactly.
Is that true? Okay, that's really cool. Yeah. So yeah, I think like now, like I think that makes a lot of sense. So now if we can get into more of like the meat of this, in terms of like this trial item content impacts island effects and online processing of English. We now know what islands are. We know online processing. Can you talk a little bit more about what specifically, like what actual questions you were trying to answer with this research? And why did you think this was interesting and important? Like what led you to ask these questions?
Yeah. So back in 2020, there was a paper that was published by some authors, Kotek et al., that looked at bias within example sentences in like linguistic literature. So looking at like all of the example sentences you might see in like a textbook or in published research, and just pointing out that there is a strong bias towards like male names, male professions, all sorts of things like that within the current literature. And they talk a lot about like, textbooks and literature, but they don't talk about like what's going on in the experimental side. And it kind of left us, like, this is work that I did with my supervisor. So it made us wonder, is this also like something that's pervasive within experimental work in linguistics? And if so, could it be having any sort of like underlying impact in the research that we're doing, just as a result of having like bias items in experiments and stuff like that? So the thing that we wanted to test was like, yeah, just that. Like if we were to present people with sentences that have bias within them, is that going to impact how they're processing like ungrammatical sentences, or specifically what we settled on was island items. So it goes back to why we chose these like weak WH island sentences, because they are marginally ungrammatical. Like some people would rate them as slightly better than strong islands. So we figured that they would be the most like vulnerable, I guess you could say, to any sort of like small like effects from the bias, like people's judgments shifting one way or another as a result of something else going on in the sentence as well. So we constructed, I can give you an example of one of the sentences we had here. So we would construct sentences like, which helmet did the cyclist forget completely when before the race they had probably purchased it?
Whoa. Can you say that one more time?
Yes.
That's a long sentence. Yeah. Are they all like that length? And
yes.
Was this presented like visually or auditor or yeah?
Yeah. So this was presented as a self-paced reading task. So again, the sentence was, which helmet did the cyclist forget completely when before the race they had probably purchased it?
Okay. Yep.
So that it pronoun at the end there is associated with the WH phrase at the beginning as well. It's called a resumptive pronoun. So that one is weird because, again, you have that WH crossover portion there where you have the when in the middle of the sentence there, and the WH word that was moved to the front is coming from like well within that embedded clause.
Right. So this is the same case of like the other example you gave where we have the two WH words, and it's weird that the one that's way further down the sentence is now at the beginning of the sentence.
Exactly.
Because like, why would you move it that far?
Yeah.
Okay.
Whereas if you were to say something like, which helmet did the cyclist forget that they had purchased before it, that's totally fine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you don't have that second WH word throwing people off.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so presenting people with sentences like that in a self-paced reading thing, so they weren't going word by word, it would be like a chunk of one or two words that they would be seeing. But crucially, that when there like in the middle of the sentence. We call that like the critical point that we were looking at, because that's when they would, if you're reading that through, that's when you would discover that all of a sudden you're in an island, because you have this WH word out front. And even if you didn't know until today how these WH questions are like conceived of and everything, in your mind you are tracking, okay, I have this WH word hanging, and now I've run into another one, and that's weird because that shouldn't be allowed. So what you see is, in a neutral sentence like that, people are pausing a little bit and getting hung up on that WH word because like now there's conflicting information in their minds.
Okay, yeah. So that, like, the example you just gave is what you would call a neutral example,
Yeah.
where you didn't want to inject any bias in there.
Exactly.
Okay.
So what we had done is we had pre-tested a whole bunch of nouns, including things like, cyclist, general, nurse, podcaster, even, just to see what is like considered more biased towards male, what's more biased towards female, and what would be classified as neutral. And cyclist ended up being like the most neutral item that we
Really?
had. So it makes for a really good example. Yeah.
That's fair. Yeah, I can see that happening.
Yeah.
That's okay. Cool. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I think that's really interesting too, that this wasn't anything like this hasn't been done in the literature and hasn't really been looked at very much.
From the standpoint of the bias, it hasn't, but like with islands in general.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, islands have been looked at a lot. I do know that. But yeah, the bias part of it, because I also noticed that, like, I mean, I've read how many linguistics textbooks, and I feel like there is a lot of bias in those example sentences, and I think it's really interesting for you guys to actually take that time to look at that a little bit closer.
Mm-hmm. I mean, every linguistics textbook you read has some variation of John and Mary doing something, right?
Yes,
so.
Bill sometimes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I know. I'm also guilty of that. I use John and Mary all the time.
I know. It's a problem. It's hard to overwrite that.
You're listening to Linguistically Aware, broadcasting on CJSW 90.9 FM on Treaty 7 land. Listen to this episode or any other episode of Linguistically Aware in full at cjsw.com or Apple Podcasts. Just search Linguistically Aware. If you'd like to learn more about linguistics at the University of Calgary, be sure to visit our website, calgarylinguistics.ca.
Okay, yeah. So that's a really interesting question that you guys are asking. So I'm wondering now if you could tell us. You did kind of allude to this a little bit of they saw things one at a time. I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more details about how you went about answering these questions. So what actual experiments you did, and what your findings were.
Yeah. So this was a collection of 3 online experiments that we did. The first one was done on like around 150 people. Collected through an online platform known as Prolific, where we presented them with these sentences. Like I presented the neutral one of which helmet did the cyclist forget completely when before the race they had probably purchased it, something like that, right? But then we also presented sentences that had biased material in them. So the bias wasn't just from like the profession, so like having a nurse or a general instead of a cyclist, but also from the object that we are extracting and the pronoun, like the gendered pronoun that is lower down in the sentence. So we would present, in addition to the neutral ones, something like, which lipstick did the general forget completely where after the parade she had accidentally left it? So like matching and mismatching the underlying bias of the professions and the items that are associated with them as well. So, generals being biased towards males and lipstick being biased towards females, typically. So presenting all of these participants with sentences like this, region by region, and just examining like what their reaction times and how they are processing each of those individual regions. Unfortunately for us, nothing really ended up coming out as being extremely significant with like any of that underlying bias at the profession when we're like mismatching lipstick in general. Nothing really seemed to jump out with that. And then later down at the pronoun, again, nothing really significant coming out of it. But what we found is that looking at that island region, where like the when or where, I guess, there was this pattern that emerged where the neutral items like cyclist were the ones that were read the slowest. And then the feminine items, so like a nurse, anything like that, would be read just a little bit faster. And then male coded items like generals would be read even faster than that. So it created this like nice three-way contrast of neutral, feminine, masculine. And we thought, well, that's really weird. Like, what is it about like the gender stereotype of the profession that is like causing people to like categorically split these types of items? And the problem with that experiment was we didn't include any sentences that didn't have an island in it. So they all just had this island, and all we could tell is that all three islands were significantly different from each other.
Yeah.
So that led to a follow-up experiment where we used those same biased items, but then also included a fourth category, which had like non-island sentences. So like what I had presented there, like which helmet did the cyclist completely forget that they had purchased before it, or something like that. So like not having that second WH word there means that it's not an island, which means that it's like completely grammatical and people shouldn't hesitate on it at all. And indeed, that is kind of what we found in the second experiment, where we again saw the same three-way contrast where neutral items were the slowest, feminine slightly faster, masculine even faster than that. But then the non-island sentences were the fastest of them all. People were completely unbothered by it. So what this showed is that participants they are aware of this island. They are slowing down where we expect them to, which is good that they're paying attention and processing things the way that they should. But it's still this weird pattern of why are they more like when there's a neutral item, they're more aware of the island. But when we're introducing biased materials, they seem to be like a little bit less bothered by it. So it's like the bias within the sentence is like mediating these island effects that we would expect to see.
That is so interesting, and I'm like I find this really. I don't know. Like my question is why? Do you have any ideas? I mean, I don't know. Have you guys talked about this and like any ideas as to why? I assume it would be speculation at this point. I don't think you guys have any for sure, like, definite answers for that, but do you have any ideas as to why?
No, we also have that same question because it's very weird because like it was completely replicated the exact same pattern in both of those experiments. And so what we did was we wanted to know more about why and like dig into it a little bit more. So we actually ran a third experiment, again, another online experiment using these like same sets of trial items, both islands and non-islands. And then we also controlled for participant gender this time. So looking at an equal number of male participants and female participants to see if that had any sort of interplay. And for a third time, we replicated that same pattern where neutral items are the slowest, female items are slightly faster, and masculine items are even faster, but all of them are slower than the non-island sentences. So again, still aware of the island effects, but having a male bias specifically seems to make them like less impacted, less bothered by the island. Like it got to a point where there was this interaction where female participants looking at items with like a male bias in them were actually approaching what would be like a non-island type situation. Wow. Where they were like that much distracted, I guess you could say, by the male biased items that they were like almost breezing through it like it wasn't even there.
Wow, that's so interesting. And so you found the same pattern a third time. Did you find any differences between the gender of the participant?
There were some like interactions, specifically like in what we would call the spillover region. So something like right after that region. So if we number the regions 1 through 13. If the island region is region 6, then the spillover would be like the following region 7.
Yeah.
So in the case of these sentences, it would just be like an adverb like before or after, something like that. And what we found is that on the non-island ones, female participants would slow down in that spillover region. And male participants would speed up. So it created like a weird interaction there. But that's where we found Also that the female participants in the spillover are speeding up even more on the masculine items and like kind of like closing that gap between what's an island and what isn't with female participants.
Wow. Were you guys surprised?
Very surprised. Like you know, when you see something weird happen, like once is strange, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is okay, there's definitely something going on here.
Yeah. And it's extra interesting because it's not clear what's going on. Like the why still seems to be an open question.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So that was with groups of like male and female participants, and like because this is still unclear and unanswered to us, we are going to continue doing this research. So now we want to look at participants that don't identify on the gender binary, so non-binary or what have you participants.
That was going to be my next question because that makes sense.
Yeah, to see if that has any sort of impact and if they're patterning like more specifically with one group versus the other, or if they're doing something totally different, which is also possible. But ultimately what this did show us is that like, yes, there is an impact of including biased items in your like trial items when you're running an experiment, because like just that difference between having a male biased item being so much faster than a neutral item, like that can be impacting. Like if you're not looking at anything that involves bias, it can be impacting the thing that you are looking at by introducing something that's biased. So it showed that like, we need to be like more careful in how we're designing trial items to make sure that we're not like inadvertently like impacting how participants are processing like subtle syntactic things. Yeah,
I was going to say like it seems pretty clear like from this research like how this would impact like future linguistic studies. Like especially like in experimental syntax, for example, like if you're seeing these differences that people didn't necessarily consider when they were designing their experiments, they might be seeing effects that aren't there or are there for different reasons than they're thinking. Mm-hmm. You know, like is it the bias that's doing something, or is it the island? So like it seems very clear to me like how this like why this is really important to linguists and linguistics research. I'm wondering if you also have any ideas for what this research might mean for how we understand language and gender stereotypes more generally. I know that's a little bit more of a, like, I know that's more why, which we don't know why, but I just wanted to see if you had any other thoughts on that. Because I do, like, as a linguist myself, I'm like, wow, this is really great to know for designing experiments. But yeah, I'm wondering if you've thought, like, even if it's just your own personal thoughts on what this might mean. Yeah,
that's something that we are still working on, and we plan on, like, you know, communicating with people like in like gender studies programs and stuff, because it's getting to the point where it feels like beyond a linguistic thing, like there's something like extra linguistic going on that we're having a hard time like finding a good reason for, because it's weird like to get this pattern where like the male bias seems to be like the most distracting, because in a lot of languages, like in English, like there are some people that make the argument that like masculine is like the underlying default for a lot of things. So you would think that like having a masculine bias based on that would be less distracting. But the data that we're finding shows that it is actually quite distracting, and they seem to be placing more focus on that and ignoring something syntactically wrong, like an island violation. So it's very weird to think about, and it's very like hard to come up with a good answer for. So like that's like if you do have any suggestions or any thoughts, I'd love to hear them.
No, I know. Yeah, that was actually going to be my one thought about this was talking to people in other disciplines, and it makes me like I just had Cheryl in here last time, and we talked a little bit about like linguistics as like an inherently interdisciplinary field. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is kind of a good example of that. Like, yeah, you're right. The answer for this might not be in linguistics strictly, you know, it might be something to do more with our general perception of gender, our general, I don't know. That's really, really interesting. I would really love to find out.
Yeah, so would we. That's why we're looking into it. But it's always nice to know that there are follow-up questions and that there is going to be like more research to do, because like there's still, even though we have this like nice answer that yes, including biased items in your like trial items for experiments is a problem and you shouldn't be doing it. Now it just leads to all these follow-up questions of, okay, it's a problem. Why is it a problem?
Yeah.
Why are people doing that?
No, yeah, that's all really interesting. And it's really cool that we don't know the why yet. And honestly, like if you guys find out something, please let me know and we will have you back and you can come talk about it so that we can hear like the exciting conclusion. Although I don't know, that might take a very long time.
Well, we'll see. Yeah, we do have some follow-up studies planned that we're going to be running soon, and hopefully we can dig more into the why. We're also going to start looking at other languages like French and Spanish, which inherently have like more just gender information contained on the words themselves, like gendered nouns and everything. So seeing if they pattern in a similar fashion as well, or if they're also doing something completely different. This might just be like a uniquely North American English type of thing. So looking at languages where gender is more inherent and maybe people will be more bothered by mismatches or other things, like that will also hopefully further our understanding of what might be going on here.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys find out from that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, those were all the questions I had for you. So thank you so much for coming in and explaining all of this. I found it very interesting. Like I know I was slightly familiar with this, but it was really nice to really talk through it in depth. So thank you very much for taking the time to come here and sit down with us. And yeah, good luck with finding out why.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was fun.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Linguistically Aware. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the fascinating world of linguistics. If you'd like to learn more about linguistics, please visit our website, calgarylinguistics.ca. Until next time, keep exploring the beauty of language.